Content warning. This podcast discusses topics related to cults, including manipulation, psychological abuse, coercion, exploitation, and other forms of harmful behavior. Listener discretion is advised. Some episodes may contain descriptions of traumatic experiences, violence, sexual abuse, and mental health issues. If you're sensitive to these topics or have a history of trauma, please take care while listening. If you or someone you know is currently in a cult or experiencing abuse, please seek support from someone you trust, a mental health professional, or the authorities. Welcome to How Did We Get Here, the podcast where we dive in and dissect the world of infamous and current cults and unearth the hidden psyche of their leaders. I am Emily, your guide in this journey, and a psych nurse by trade. That being said, I am not formally diagnosing anybody with anything on this show, only coming from my experience and research when I talk about mental disorders or other psychological phenomena. Every week, we will examine the often overlooked allure of the macabre that has lured countless individuals into their fold. Together, we will delve into infamous cults like the Manson family, the People's Temple, and lesser-known ones that just might be springing up in your neighborhood. Black smoke billows and black columns as an arc burns. If you're religious, you would hope that the souls of the people in that arc are rising toward heaven in that terrible cloud. If you're not, it is still a horrifying scene, and it stinks like rotten, burning flesh. On March 17, 2000, Credonia Marinde and Joseph K. Buteri told their followers that the apocalypse was on its way, and that they would need to wait in the ark until it was over. Doomsday came, but only for the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. How did we get here? How did a bartender and a bureaucrat bring about the apocalypse in Uganda? Prepare for a captivating journey this week as we delve into the enigmatic world of a cult that may have escaped your radar. The movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God. Despite its relative obscurity, this cult carries a chilling reputation bound to pique your interest, so prepare to be enthralled as we embark on an intriguing exploration of this mysterious group. Established in Uganda during the tumultuous 1980s, the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God promised salvation to its followers, anticipating an imminent rapture. Credonia Marinde and Joseph K. Buteri, recognizing Uganda's state of unrest, ruthlessly exploited the fears of its citizens. The culmination of this manipulation was a catastrophic event in March 2000. Religious movements often pop up when there are difficult times. Let's look at Uganda during this time to understand the world in which this movement was created. 3 significant factors made life uncertain in Uganda: Idi Amin, AIDS, and the Ugandan Bush War. Idi Amin was a harsh dictator who ruled Uganda in the 1980s. He served in the British military until he took power in 1971. Amin overthrew his superior, Milton Obote, who had challenged him for insubordination. Idi Amin won the hearts of his people until he destroyed the economy by getting rid of the Asian people who lived in Uganda and owned businesses there. Ethnic purgings were a common theme in Amin's rule. 10,000 people died within his regime. He was soon overthrown. Afterwards, rebel groups fought the new government. Milton Obote became president again, though he was soon replaced by his general, Tito Okello. Yoweri Museveni began a rebel group of his own and fought against this establishment, eventually overtaking the capital. Museveni took power and exiled both Amin and Obote. Different groups have tried numerous times to overthrow Museveni, and they still do to this day. AIDS, or acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, is a late stage of HIV. A healthy person should have a white blood cell count between 500 to 1600 cells per cubic millimeter. A person receives a diagnosis of AIDS when that number falls below 200. Symptoms of the disorder include rapid weight loss, fevers that don't go away, constant diarrhea, and becoming ill with infections that people with functional immune systems do not. The disease is spread by bodily fluids crossing membranes. Common ways of spreading the disease are intravenous drug use, unprotected sexual contact of any type, and childbirth. AIDS spread so much in Africa during the 1980s because of poverty, drug use, sexual behaviors, and the taboos surrounding drug use and sexual behavior. There were plenty of conflicts in Africa during the 20th century as nations tried to free themselves from European power. Economies were unstable at best, leading to great poverty. Lack of education and access to medical care made it hard to control the number of new HIV and AIDS cases. With poverty comes drug use and prostitution. People did what they needed to so they could survive, and going from place to place in search of work and seeing the local prostitutes in each of these places could spread the disease very quickly. At the same time, religions forbade drug use and prostitution, and this was a very religious area. According to Marquette University, Sub-Saharan Africa has one of the most rapidly growing Roman Catholic populations in the world. Roman Catholicism differs from other Christian denominations in that the Church heavily emphasizes saints and the Virgin Mary. They pray to God through the saints, and the saints act on their behalf. Mary is the mother of Jesus, and thus is the mother of the world. Especially in Roman Catholicism, people did not talk about these things and did not seek help for their condition. And as a religious person, seeing people around you fall victim to such a terrible disease would undoubtedly make someone feel like God was punishing the world around you. At the same time, Yoweri Museveni led a campaign to slow the epidemic. Though Uganda was one of the countries in Africa least affected by AIDS, it still had a 16% infection rate. Museveni made a big push for education and declared that blood being sent for transfusions was to be tested before being used, and that significantly slowed the virus's spread. In the 90s, Uganda saw an infection rate of 4 to 6%. Now that we know what Uganda was like when the movement for the restoration of the Ten Commandments of God began, we can focus on who its leaders were. Joseph Kibwetere was the face of the cult, but Credonia Merende was the mind. Joseph Kasapari, John Kamagara, and Dominic Katarababo were also part of the leadership. Credonia Merende, or the programmer, has little biographical information available. She was reportedly beautiful but never smiled. She ran a bar and was known for brewing a delicious banana beer. And she also spread a rumor that she was a hooker. She had a history of setting fires to things when people did not do as she wanted. For example, she was sent to a mental institution after burning the home of a man who had rejected her advances, and she was diagnosed as mentally disturbed. Mentally disturbed is kind of a catch-all term for when people can't really diagnose you with a proper psychological or psychiatric condition. Credonia's bar went bankrupt, and she turned to Roman Catholicism. She claimed to have seen the visions of the Virgin Mary. Claims such as that were taken very seriously in the devoutly Catholic area where she lived. Credonia found Joseph Kibwetere, who was the prophet, and Joseph Kibwetere was raised in a Catholic household. He owned land, had many businesses, and became a commissioner of public works during Idi Amin's regime. When Amin was removed from power, Kibwetere lost that position and status. He went to live on some of his land and turned to God for comfort. Kibwetere built a church and a school on his land. He ensured his 8 children attended church, prayed the rosary before bed, and prayed as a family before going to school. His family took messages from heaven very seriously. Credonia Merende moved into Kibwetere's home. Kibwetere's family was happy for a time, because they believed that Credonia truly did hear messages from heaven as she claimed. Things soon became very dark, though. According to Kipotari's wife, Credonia made them sell their fridge, their car, their slow cooker, their land. The family gave all of that money to Credonia. She also made Kipotari remove his children from school, stating that schools were taking the children away from God's grace. She beat and starved Kipotari's children. She also burned his wife's clothing. And while Credonia Mirande was doing all of this, Joseph Kipotari stood by and did nothing. Eventually, one of Kipotari's sons went to the police and had Mirande and Kipotari, along with the other 200 followers living at the house, leave. Dominic Kitari Babo, John Kamagara, and Joseph Casaporari were former Catholic priests excommunicated from the church. Their various connections to movement members' families brought them into Credonia Mirande's fold. They held leadership roles and enforced the programmer's teachings. What were those teachings? First and foremost, the group strictly adhered to the 10 Commandments. To highlight how strictly they wanted you to adhere to the 10 Commandments, members were not allowed to speak to one another for fear of breaking the 9th commandment, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." The movement's main book was a timely message from heaven, the end of the present time. The book discussed how mankind had strayed from God and how to fix it. Alcohol was something made by Satan to encourage simple acts such as promiscuity and substance abuse. Owning pets was Satan's way of fighting humanity, as Satan controlled cats and dogs. The book also had issues with women wearing pants and wearing makeup and wearing short skirts. A timely message from heaven outlined the strict rules people had to follow to restore the 10 Commandments. According to the book, this was the only way to survive the impending apocalypse. The people worthy of saving would go into special arks and wait out the cataclysms that God would supposedly bring about. Each country had its own set of punishments. For example, France's laziness would not permit it to survive the chastisements that would be inflicted upon it. The AIDS epidemic was allegedly a punishment that God was casting down as well. The people in the arks would wait out the apocalypse in 3 days of darkness. During this time, death and evil would be destroyed, and people would emerge in a new world and generation. Uganda itself would be the new Holy Land. When was all of this supposed to happen? As with many cults, they believed this would happen in 2000. The people in the movement did not think 2001 would happen. The world would start over, and the new generation would begin in year 1. What was life like for a follower? When someone joined the movement, they sold off all of their possessions, and the money went to the movement. Prospective members were encouraged to bring their families with them. If the family members didn't want to go, the prospective member was forbidden from speaking to them. At its height, the movement reported about 5,000 members. New members listened to a timely message from heaven and donned black robes. They moved to one of the movement's buildings in the Kanungu district. They did many chores, from growing crops to tending to livestock and building more space for members. The children went to school that was on the commune. Movement members spent more time working, praying, and fasting than resting. They spoke to one another only in sign language, out of fear of breaking the 9th commandment. They never talked to their superiors. Every evening, all of the leadership would leave the movement in prayer. The leadership guided them towards the apocalypse that was to come. What kicked off the fiery end of this cult? The leaders predicted that the apocalypse would come on January 1st, 2000. Leading up to that, members stopped working in the field. They sold off clothing, cattle, and land. Members tried to bring back former members of the movement. Leadership demanded that members confess their sins. The new millennium began with no apocalypse. This angered members, and they stopped giving money to the movement. People demanded that their assets and belongings be returned at once. To quiet this insurgent, Mirande stated that she received word from the Virgin Mary that the apocalypse would come on March 17th that year. Members announced that a great party would be held on March 17th and 18th to celebrate the new world. The authorities later believed this announcement was to distract them from the movement's true intentions. Leading up to this, they had a great feast where they roasted some cows, and drank a lot of Coca-Cola to celebrate the new world. On the morning of March 17th, members were woken up early to pray. After a few hours of prayer, they had breakfast and bathed. After this, they shaved their heads, donned their robes, and entered the ark. Members were told that the apocalypse would soon start, and the ark would be boarded up so that nobody would get out and be lost in the chastisements. Once all the doors and windows were boarded, lighter fluid was poured on the ark and set ablaze. People living near the commune recalled the smell of burning flesh and said they were unable to eat meat for a while after that. Authorities could identify about 500 bodies. More bodies were found strangled, stabbed, and poisoned nearby. In total, over 900 people died at the hands of the movement, and they say it was more than how many people died at Jonestown. The leadership is still believed to be alive, and international warrants have been put out for their arrest. Joseph Kibwetere was reported to be hiding in Malawi. Still, as of right now, nobody has faced punishment for this horrific mass murder. So, how did we get here? Discuss the history of what happened, so let's focus on the why. In times of uncertainty, people tend to lean towards religion. It can help give someone meaning to the suffering around them. If anyone around you was dying of starvation or illness and someone came along claiming that they knew the way out of this time of suffering, you would surely follow them. Former members described this exact sentiment. During their time in the movement, members were overworked and starving, but leadership would bless them, making it all worth it. They're suffering right now on Earth, but when the apocalypse came, that suffering would be over. A cult leader declaring the date of an apocalypse gives people in distress hope. They have something to look forward to. Their days of suffering in the world of evil men are numbered. Not following through on that promise angers people and removes the power structure the leader worked so hard to create. Power is not something we humans like to give away freely. In the case of Credonia Marinde and Joseph Kibwetere, they acted desperately to keep it. Thanks for tuning in to How Did We Get Here? Tune in next week for our episode on the Source family. Follow this podcast so that when a new episode comes out, you're the first one to hear it. I'm on Spotify and iHeartRadio and Apple Podcasts. Follow me on X, TikTok, and Instagram at EmiCast1018. That's EMICAST1018. Stay aware and stay safe, my friends.